All right, cool. Well, I want to end with us taking this to Jesus, actually looking at his words, and he does interact with the principle of talion in Matthew 5:38 through 42. He says, "You've heard it said that it was said, or pardon me, you've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you." We've already
Yeah.
talked about this a lot.
Yeah, I think
Um,
the context of what's going on here is really important, as it always is. But I portrayed this in class recently with some freshmen. I talked about, you got to remember, this is like, the 3D magic eyes, that like it looks like a static screen, but if you cross your eyes the right way and squint, you can kind of see a three-dimensional, not just a two-dimensional image, but a three-dimensional image in them.
yeah.
And I feel like Jesus is trying, like, he can see the shark that's beneath all the static on the screen, and he's trying to get people to see this really complex three-dimensional, five-dimensional reality called the kingdom of heaven. And this is him using their present cognition, their present thinking about the law and the instruction of God, how they're supposed to live it out, and twisting it, everywhere he can to help them, tighten the screws to help narrow their focus. Wait, that's a really bad analogy, but um, like almost an Iron Maiden. But to really narrow their focus here. So what's fascinating to me is that he takes Exodus 21's telling of the eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, not the other ones. He puts it in the context of power and vulnerability in a relationship. And then he puts you in the seat of vulnerability, and he says, "Yeah, it's fine." Almost like you become Isaac to Abraham walking up to Mount Moriah, and it's like, yeah, God's going to provide. Don't worry. This is going to get taken care of. You can be weak. You can give up things. You can, take no tunics with you, as happens later in that gospel. Um, and that's part of that is like you're not going to like be able to discern the pattern of the kingdom of God if you're hung up in this other interpretation of eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. So in some ways,
Mhm.
he is directly speaking to us today who think, if you think biblical justice is like retaliation, he's talking to you.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, so I look at what he's doing in chapter 5 kind of as a program. Is he begins by saying, I've not come to abolish the
Right,
law
right.
at
Not a
all.
single bit of it. Yeah.
No, yeah, not one bit. And then he goes on to hit the high notes of some of the Ten Commandments. And what he does in every instance is, if you have a floor and a ceiling, it seems like in every instance he's raising the floor.
Right.
So life in the kingdom is, it is here, yeah, sure. But I really do want you up as close to holiness as you can get, because that was always the program.
Right. And it's a really
Um,
weird floor where like it's the
yeah,
kind of floor like where people can just smack you around and it's fine. Like you don't even have to be offended by it.
right. And I would go so far as to say that I think the reason that he goes here is, kind of underwritten in Matthew 7, verse 12. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. And so for me, Jesus is saying, okay, you've been offended, so do unto others what you would. How many times do people give mercy to themselves, but give no
Right.
mercy
Right.
to anybody else? And Jesus is saying, like, if you want that mercy and you've been offended, you got to give it.
Yeah. It's
Um,
psychology, they call it attribution bias, where everything somebody does wrong when they do it, it's because of their personality. Like they're just a bad, they're just, a bad person with time or whatever, because that's why they show up late. But when I show up late, it's because of the traffic. It's because of, it's all these other things. Hey there, if you've benefited from this content at all, please hit the like and subscribe, or subscribe and like, one of those or both of them together on this video. It helps us tremendously with the math algorithm nerd monsters. Yeah, I think that's a very helpful way to tie it together. Is that he's raising the floor, and again, I think what's remarkable about what he's doing, just with the how he's rhetorically using the Torah, is he's actually not changing anything about it, Um, and if you take the view that Jesus is giving a new gospel ethic that has never existed in the world before, I think you're just reading the Torah through that kind of Roman legalized. These are just a bunch of rules that we break or keep. Which there's a whole tradition of that, and which means you're buying into the whole Luther's gospel versus law dichotomy, which breaks down immediately once you realize the mercy and the principles and the instances going on in the law, that it's instruction for wisdom, etc. So yeah, it's in some ways we'd say this is a different view than a lot of Christians might currently hold, but it's a very old view that I would like to suggest that Jesus himself held and
Yeah.
really wanted us to hold as well. So
And if I could kind of reformulate the principle of talion for our ears, I might do so by saying you may impair your neighbor up to the level that you have been impaired. But the conditional, you may does not require you
right,
to.
right.
And it's because harm has been done that the image of God, it's all at work in there. So I think that might make it a little bit more palatable to our ears, even though it's doing the exact same thing. Do you have any?
Yeah, well, I think that, and I think the other side, which is going to be the stretch for people, is the principle of retaliation means you can't exploit people who are vulnerable with reference to you. But you, and Jesus is following the logic of the text, but you can be exploited and it's okay.
That's good.
Which is the package that is shocking. I mean, that's not where most people, and which is why people, again, if you see it in Exodus, then it's not shocking when Jesus just reiterates that and kind of flips it also and says, yeah, and you can trust God in these things. Um, but if you never notice this in Exodus, like I didn't for a long time, then you would think that Jesus is doing some entirely new thing for this New Testament ethic called the kingdom of God, etc. All right. We kicked this
So
dead horse.
I have one final question.
Okay.
How would you apply this for Christians today in a meaningful way when it comes to social media or social interaction, political views? What
Yeah.
would you do?
I think, well, for Americans, let's just, because that's the culture I'm most familiar with. I think there's all kinds of ways. When my wife's aunt died of medical malpractice, uh, like genuine, it was they nicked her artery and closed her up, and she bled to death within inside of herself. Like it was a bad
Jeez.
situation at 43 years old.
Oh,
The feeling of even myself, I was in seminary at the time, was kind of like, well, we're going to get millions from, like, the family is going to get money from this, right? And the idea is, I mean, there's kind of a sweet idea that her life was invaluable, but that's actually not how the tort works in courts. They actually calculate, okay, she was 43 years old, so she had 30 years of work left. She made this much money a year. That's how much money you can recoup. And then you can do harms and damages and that kind of stuff. But there really is this general, I would say, even in the way we think of this is kind of a stretch, but wages is like we think that wages should always go up. So we should always get raises, which is entirely out of step with reality, right? If you think about this for a second, that like it only benefits the worker and has no benefit towards the organization. So even the way we relate to things, we just expect this kind of asymmetrical relationship with things. Things should just not only go well, but they should go better than what we put in. Almost like an investment mentality. I should be getting 10 to 15% back on this investment. Um, and I feel like this is just latent in American culture, in all kinds of ways. Social media, I don't know. I can't. I mean, I can think of some really nasty behavior on social media where it's like we're gonna cancel this person and take them down because they said this thing, rather
sure.
than having any kind of reasonable discussion or whatever. But that's the only place my mind goes. And with that, I should probably shut up.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. I hope it will be helpful to many.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. You always have profound insights that help me think more clearly as well.
Awesome. Have a good one.
All right. See you.